Okay, so next up, earn more faster by automating B2B payments. I think that's right. We got everybody? Well, is that Cyrosch? Cyrosch is here. We've got 2 of 3, not bad. Andrew, do we have Andrew in the audience? All right, Andrew's here. Great, come on up, everybody. Oh, no, there's mics up here. Okay, so I think you're talking for the next 40 minutes, is that correct? And then up after that, we'll be taking a 90-minute break. But thank you all for your attention, and here you go.
Hello, yeah. Great, well, come on in. I think we can sit in the comfy sofas. Quite bright in here. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we have the next 30 minutes or so. We're going to be speaking about B2B payments and what that means for 3 very different startups. I've actually just met 2 of them, so we'll try and make the conversation flow. I'm just a quick introduction. I'm one of the investors at Dawn. Dawn is a B2B focused fund, so we invest in fintech and software across Series A's and B's, including B2B payments. And I'm usually based in London, but cover the French market, so happy to be here kind of about a week a month. With that in mind, I'm going to let my much more interesting speakers introduce themselves and also their companies, a little bit about the use cases that you're targeting and the types of customers and problems that you're solving. So over to you, Cyrosch.
Yeah, hi, I'm Cyrosch, co-founder and CEO of GetPaid. We can talk a bit about it later, but what we do is we started off as classic B2B payments, also as a PSP, and then moved more and more, I would say, up in terms of size of companies and more towards the finance department, so to speak, and kind of like defining and looking at B2B payments from an finance ops perspective, kind of like trying to automate payments that are done in the classic way in B2B, so over bank accounts, looking at what comes after and before payment, so everything from invoice to cash, everything from communication that is around, everything from reminders, and specifically everything from a data perspective, which is what we felt is a central part when it comes to B2B payments, as opposed to when you would look at B2C payments, where kind of like the pay-in is more the relevant point.
Great, thank you. And Andrew?
Hey, my name is Andrew. I serve Paddle as CMO. Formerly, I was a founder in the MarTech space, and so this whole complicated world of B2B payments was very new to me a few years ago. I still feel I'm learning every day. Paddle serves about 4,000 digital product companies globally, processing over $1 billion GMV. And specifically what we're doing is if you set up a largely self-serve, freemium type model software business, you end up being born global. You sell to the entire world very, very quickly. And that's our sweet spot. Pretty early stage, people who are dealing with the complexity of international sales from their website. And we take care of that checkout, multiple payment methods, multiple currencies, fraud prevention, refunds, chargebacks, and all of the tax compliance. So you can sell efficiently and in a tax compliant way to every single geography around the world from day one. We do that from startups that are processing their first dollar revenue to startups doing hundreds of millions.
Thank you. And Lucas?
Last. So I'm Lucas from France. I'm the CEO and founder of Hyperline. Hyperline is basically we're a billing solution that's evolving into something that's, I hope, much bigger, but we're a quote-to-cash solution, mostly for B2B SaaS companies. So you may have heard of ChargeBee, Zuora. So basically we are a fresh view of these softwares, trying to cut down implementation time by a lot and trying to also manage natively everything around the new wave of pricing models that you can have around especially usage-based and being more flexible on your pricing dynamics. And we cover everything from contracts, so making the contract with your customer and then agreeing on terms, to getting paid, where we integrate with payment processors usually and orchestrate payments. And it's been a 2 years journey so far, so a bit younger than you guys, but still interesting. And before that, I was working in engineering at Spendesk, who's built a bank.
Great. And why don't we start off by understanding a little bit the challenges and in B2B payments, like why is B2B payments so hard? And all of you are targeting actually different parts of the B2B payment chain, if we will. So maybe Lucas, just from your end, like why is it hard? What's the complexity? What's the problem that you're primarily looking to address?
It's a good question because we had the exact same with an investors conversation yesterday around investors, where the investor asked exactly that question, like what makes it hard? I think the problem with B2B payment right now is not really about payment, it's more about the workflow on top of the payments. Basically, when you look at payments, you want three things. You want to get paid fast, you want to get paid with a cheap cost, if possible, and you want to get paid the right amount. And you have different softwares doing different things within that stack. The problem is the entire system is not designed to accommodate these three things. If you want cheap payment, you have transfers, and then transfers, we all know, it's a nightmare. So you have to build an entire recovery stack on top of that. You have payments, it's really expensive. You have cards, sorry, but really expensive. And then you have SEPA, ACH, all of these things that are very geographical based. I don't know if you guys do it, but probably. And it's a nightmare for people as soon as you want to go internationally. You have disputes, you have fraud. So I think the problem with B2B payments right now is more around the workflows around the payments than the payment themselves. And how do you optimize your stack in order to get the most value out of it without spending too much time and money in there? That's what we're trying to do, at least.
And maybe Cyrosch, from your end?
Yeah, maybe kind of like looking at more traditional companies, looking at more like mid and larger size. Some of the questions that Luca mentioned already answered. It's like, so a classic profile that you would have in terms of paying would just be bank transfers, maybe a bit of STD, smaller portion would be card, but growing. And then there's like typical questions that you would answer that you would ask yourself is like, as a mid or large size company, it's like, hey, in how many countries am I operating? What do I have as kind of like the payment methods? And it's usually bank billed. How many different entities do I have? How many bank accounts do I have? And then kind of like ask yourself, when it comes to automating, what are the biggest pain points that I have? Is it that the biggest pain point is kind of like trying to automate invoicing in many countries? Is a big pain point that everything around reconciliation, you mentioned it is a pain when you have bank payments, but a typical customer would have like between 5,000 and 30,000 euros of a payment. How do I actually automate and reconcile them? What was my biggest pain point? The customer communication that kind of like connects to each of these payables, and how do I automate this? And this is kind of like a starting point that you would usually have from trying to approach the topic of automating, because automating is also a gradual step when it comes to B2B payments, because you might have a legacy stack. You have an 80-20 rule of which of the payments you actually want to automate and where are the biggest pain points, and that's where you would typically start. An interesting point is that for a lot of these points, kind of like unifying and connecting data is, I would say, a key source to kind of like tackling that problem, because you have, when it comes to more traditional payment methods, a very unique stack per company. So you would have an invoicing system, you would have an ERP system, you would have more or multiple bank accounts. If you then have a short or like a smaller portion of credit card, you would have another kind of like data source to it. You have a lot of data sources coming from your customers, email communication, phone communication, and then kind of like bringing all of that together is kind of like a key to automate, and something that a lot of the CFOs or directors of receivables and collection are thinking about.
Thank you. And Andrew, on your side, so we've spoken about workflow, we've spoken about some of the data complexity and various infrastructures we'll touch back on a bit later. But from your end, what are you observing as kind of the key, why is it so hard to automate B2B payments for your customers?
I think the general lesson, if we step back here, is one of focus in order to make something really complex simple. Generally in our data, we see a huge amount, and growth rates are high in very vertical solutions and in solutions that have something compelling in the AI space. Horizontal solutions are not growing as fast. We are very clearly a vertical solution. And so for us, when we think about complexity, it's not about trying to boil the ocean for everybody. It's trying to be very specific on who we serve. So if you have physical products, if you charge for human services, for consulting, we don't serve either of those use cases. If you have some kind of payments model as part of your pricing, we don't serve that. We're very clear that it's one-time payments or subscription payments for digital products, software, prosumer, consumer, games, as well as B2B. And it's when you're selling globally. And if we wrap that around and make that focus, then it becomes something we can solve in its entirety. And for many of our customers, thousands of them, we are their system of record. They get one reverse invoice every single month, and we completely abstract away that complexity for them. Our key product philosophy is do it for them, is take away, not give them tools to do it better, but do it for them. But we can only do that because we're taking a vertical focus on the market, rather than trying to do to solve too many pieces of complexity at the same time. And so you have to choose which battle you want to fight.
And actually, just picking up on something you mentioned on the globality of your customers and companies, how is automation impacting invoicing, compliance, particularly when you're expanding to different jurisdictions with different tax rates, and payment methods as well, actually? How should we overlay the increasingly global footprint of customers?
We do a lot of research around this theme of born global, and I can fly into almost every city in the world and I'll find paddle customers there, which is awesome. But they all have different problems. Their local market, the funding environment, the founder collectives, the ecosystem, the type of people they can serve, how they communicate are all different in every one of those local markets. So there is that global complexity. But I find it super interesting because a lot of those problems are very similar ones, which is that especially if you've got a reasonably small global market, domestic market, you've got to go and sell abroad very, very fast. You've got to market your services outside of your home territory very, very fast. And so, that is the space which we sit in. And back from my founder experience, we used to describe, champagne problems, the problems that only come when you have some modicum of success. Dealing with an employee you have to get rid of, or at least you've got employees. Dealing with a customer who's got lots of loud support complaints, well, at least you've got a customer. These champagne problems. And the problem is, in any founder's journey, there are these champagne problems that are a limit on your growth. You never set out to solve, reconciliation. No founder, maybe present company accepted. Most founders do not set out to solve sales tax compliance in Lithuania and Azerbaijan and, everyone. These things are difficult. And so, our job, we try and make sure people can see around those corners of growth, and we take away some of that complexity so they don't have to. And that's really core to our proposition. We want to give time back to the founders we serve to focus on their customer and their product, rather than these champagne problems that keep tripping them up.
Great, thank you. Lucas, maybe one for you. Dynamic pricing and upfront payment models, which I know you've discussed before. How can it help businesses grow more efficiently, especially as we consider B2B scaling journeys?
Yeah, I think it's an endless debate that we've had, especially in the space where I meet people who do kind of the same thing that we do. I think, except if you're OpenAI or if you're NVIDIA, which are huge successes that can dictate whatever price they want to put on their product and whatever payment terms that they have, I think most companies, it's not the case. Most companies, you have to sort of accommodate the market that you are in. You have to accommodate your customers. And so you can't say you have to pay 5 billion now or you don't get the chips in 24 months. That doesn't work that way. So the way I'm seeing it, for most companies, your dynamic pricing, so what we usually call either usage-based or some kind of things where you price based on whatever people are going to consume or how many seats that they're going to have, and then this is something that is very flexible. It's great as a hook to get people to pay more and to pay faster. The problem is it doesn't scale because you lack predictability, which is one very big thing, especially as you grow out of the seed Series A phase, you need more predictability, and you lack also predictability for your customer where they don't know how much they're going to pay. And we have very big customers, and what they say is, I want to know how much I'm going to pay for the next 3 years because you're a very important tool in my stack. And so basically, I see usage as a hook to get people to pay upfront, which is basically the grail of any business. You want people to pay upfront. You want to get as much money as you can in one payment because of the automation issue, but also because of the cash flow problem that you may have. And in the end, using usage-based as a way to get people to commit by giving them discounts is usually the way to go strategically, and that's how I would leverage that, being a SaaS business. I would emphasize, and we have a very good usage-based solution. as a product, so I know that the team wouldn't like me to say that, but it's still very hard to do usage. Even if we've reduced implementation times, and it's still something that you need to think through before doing any kind of dynamic pricing or flexible pricing, it's way harder than sending one invoice, right? And you have to maintain it, you have to think about it, you have to convince customers. There is a lot of maintenance that goes through it. So I would say yes, use carefully the dynamic hook as a way to get people to pay up front and then grow your business from there. But just one of them, except if you're a very big company, very successful monopoly, then it's very hard to dictate.
Thank you. And Cyrosch, one thought that you were mentioning earlier that I'd love to pick up on, which is the legacy stack a lot of customers have. A lot of your customers particularly don't have the most modern of infrastructures. How do you innovate and automate on this old infrastructure? What are some of the things that you as GetPaid have been doing to get around it or work with this old infrastructure, right? When you're not just dealing with next generation startups.
I mean, that's a common problem, specifically with companies that maybe grew over a couple of years or maybe a couple of decades more, I would say, almost in the traditional industry. So physical goods, manufacturing products, you name it, they would have, first of all, you would have a stack comprising of small compartments. You would have an ERP system, an accounting system. Sometimes you have on top an invoicing system, and maybe you have a CRM, obviously. And these all kind of like stack into the process from kind of like invoice to cash or quote to cash. That is a complexity. Another complexity is that you might be in different countries, so you have different entities. These entities might be acquired, so they have different ERPs. It's a convolute almost, a plethora of different systems, and it's legacy. So, and then there's basically two ways kind of like to innovate. You can kind of like rip and replace everything with something modern, which is quite difficult, quite costly. It has certain impacts on stability of the business. You are kind of like dealing with your revenue, which is always a touchy topic, so you don't want to kind of like replace everything. And it comes specifically when it comes to the ERP with significant investments that you have to do for change requests or for integration requests. What kind of like the idea is how you would usually approach is, let's say you are 500 million, something in revenue, whatever that is, and you've been in the market for a couple of years, is that you try to build an overlay with kind of like two-way connectivity. First of all, map out what are the real data sources and which is kind of like the process from invoice to cash that is relevant to you. And then try to have kind of like a very modern platform on top that connects all of these data sources and gives you not only transparency but also control to have it in one place. And that is an approach that usually works quite well. You can then still do, I would say, partial replacements of some of these subsystems. For example, you want to replace or introduce something like a credit card for like the long tail of all of your invoices that are below, let's say, 500 euros or something, and that takes out a lot of the complexity because it's a digital method by itself. Or you're looking at like, hey, collecting in certain countries and using like a collection provider for that, but kind of like building a two-way street for the relevant data sources and kind of like making it efficient that way. That's step number one. And step number two would be kind of like tackling the main driver, I would say, of unautomated processes, which is communication and the human factor. So kind of like trying to radically digitize mail communication, phone communication, etc. in one place. Kind of like having everything that a customer set to a receivable, or the change request, or the payment advices, etc. in one place is kind of like step number two that you can kind of like use. Although these are legacy systems underneath, and this is like legacy communication with a phone and legacy communication over supplier portals maybe that you get information from, is kind of like a key way to also tackle that problem.
Thank you. And maybe Luca or Andrew, anything on automating around this more legacy stacks, if you're seeing it across Hyperline or Paddle?
Thanks. So I think the problem with the legacy stack is it's always it's always a decision between losing time now or losing time over a long period of time. So losing a lot of time now or losing a small amount of time every month for like the next 5 years, which is a lot of what we get actually. Maybe Paddle, it's the same. Maybe people get you as their first billing system, but maybe also when you get people from other companies, you may have the same thing where they're like hesitating. I found, my career is not that long, but I found in the last 12 years, especially leading engineering, that spending time up front to avoid losing time in the long term is always worth it. Always worth it if you don't spend too much time on that. So my thinking is there is no magic method, there is no magic thing to automate old school systems, but there is a need to do it. And when you say it can hold for another 5 years, it probably can't. And you're going to have another hard time in 2 years fixing everything when it's too late.
Fair enough.
I can speak from our internal perspective of the infrastructure we built that then became old and outdated.
Definitely.
Which as someone who's always been on more the commercial side of the house was fascinating for me to see, because we talk about tech debt and we talk about the challenges of these things. When I joined the business, we weren't shipping because we had this monolith that we were trying to re-architect, and it cost us 100 engineers for 18 months. And we were able, after 100 engineers for 18 months, to completely rebuild what we got. And now if you go on our changelog, it's on fire. For the last 12 months, we're shipping every single week. We're knocking down all of the customer requests we've got. We're innovating for the future. And absolutely, it's a play now or pay later, or pay now or play later. And so even we're an 11-year-old business, but we built up so much tech debt over those first 9 years, and we had to take a very expensive step of stepping back. But it's paid massive dividends.
Yeah, but you did. A lot of people didn't. They're still not innovating. They're still, especially in our space, there are a lot of people that are sort of working with what they have acquired 10 years ago, 15 years ago. My thinking on that is that eventually, if you stop innovating, you're going to be replaced. But that may take 15 years, but it's going to happen.
And Luca, you were talking earlier about workflows and speaking about teams and internal processes. How can teams be empowered to handle this automation of payments rather than solely relying on the founder, CEO to manage this process?
Well, I think that the interesting thing is, like, as soon as you get above probably 1 million in revenue or 2 million, I think the CEO doesn't want to look in payments anyways. They just want to get paid and to just want to complain that they're not getting paid fast enough. I think the main problem with the team, which I mentioned briefly earlier, is like different teams are responsible for different parts of the stack. The sales team is supposed to sell. The finance team is supposed to make sure that everything is under control, there is no risk taken, and we optimize cash flow. The ops team is supposed to make everything flow together, the dev team, and basically everyone is responsible for one part of the business, and the hard part is reconciling everything. Because finance and sales are almost never going to agree. So finance is going to say, we need to sell that up front, it's costing us too much money. Sales is going to say, I can't do that. Finance is going to say, no discounts. Sales is going to say, I can't do that. And the opposite way around, right? So I think the problem is first getting sure that all of the teams in the business, even if you're a very small business, you're like 20 people, getting sure that all the team in the business have a correct understanding of the incentives that we have around payments. Why is it important to be paid? That's something I've done with my team a few times. We've done a spend desk also. Why is it important that we get money fast on the bank account? And why, as a sales team member, you should be concerned that we don't get paid fast enough because you've done a 6-month discount, right? That we don't want to do. And then also getting people to make the right compromises so that finance will also understand that when you're a sales team, you have a customer in front of you. And so maybe as a finance team, if sometimes you go into a sales call, sometimes you look at a negotiation, sometimes you look at a contract discussion and you see that it takes a month because of that clause that you want to add that is not really important for the business, then you're going to see that maybe there is a lot of things that we can improve. So I would say it's not really about the process, it's more about getting everyone the right context, and then as a CEO or as a leader, to avoid being drawn into this all the time, making sure that everyone knows where to make compromises and understands why they have to make them, so they can sort of disagree and commit. I don't like the term, but like be like unhappy and commit and still go in the right direction.
Great, thank you. And maybe we can shift gears a little bit from product to go-to-market. Would love to understand at a high level your customer profiles and how you've decided on your go-to-market motion. Maybe this has evolved from the very beginning to where you're at now, but what are some of the scaling lessons you have learned when building a go-to-market strategy, and how should companies decide between infamous self-serve models, sales-led approach when dealing with payment automation? Cyrosch.
Yeah, I mean,
Over to you.
and I guess every go-to-market motion is a bit different. How it was for us is like, obviously we also started with smaller companies, kind of like helping them, first of all, with just pure payments. They were more in the, I would say, classic platform space, classic marketplace space, and then relatively soon moved upwards, obviously, which came with longer sales cycles, a more complete product, but we're kind of like lucky enough to have a bit of traction on these larger customers. But at the same time, it came at a cost, because the larger customer gets, the more you actually need to kind of like have features ready, the broader your feature set needs to be to actually like fully activate them, right? I mean, we're talking not about one capability, which is probably embed payments, accept payments, etc. But now we're talking also about kind of like more complex stuff within a finance operation. All of a sudden, you need to have a connectivity, or you need to do invoicing yourself. You need to have connectivity and do the reconciliation. You need to have everything around reminders, around dunning. So it's kind of like quite a lot. The key really was kind of like how to get in there, rather than building something for a very long time, then trying to sell it, is that we could kind of like co-create with the larger customers, and this way, make sure that the product actually worked. B, make sure that the product is actually used, and kind of like develop it out of something that we have, rather than kind of like building something in thin air, which is usually quite difficult. And that's kind of like the evolution that we took, and how we could like gradually walk up to, I would say, larger customers in general.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think the first thing is that, and we all know this, is that there isn't one model, but there are a few principles that are really important. My background is the business I started and exited in 2019 was a whale hunting, account-based marketing, multi-$100,000 license fee every client business, and then we sold into a roll-up, and I ended up running global marketing for Optimizely, which was the group we sold into, which was 37 SKUs ranging from a few tens of thousands of dollars and a little bit of PLG on the bottom end, all the way to massive enterprise contracts with governments, etc. Very complicated, all over the shop, multi-territory, etc. And now at Paddle, we very clearly have the bifurcated market of a self-serve, trying to be as frictionless as possible down the bottom end, as well as shifting significant volume from larger accounts. And so there is no perfect one model, but the principle is you have to understand how your customer decides, and have to map what you're selling and how you're selling to how your customer decides. And when we're serving a one-person, five-person engineering-based business that are just starting to monetize what they've built, they decide in a very different way to someone who's shifting $100 million of revenue out of the App Store in order to chase a web market, and have got some existing infrastructure. And that's very different for a B2B SaaS business that's backed by Sequoia and has got a much more robust infrastructure and model going forwards. They decide in different ways. Therefore, we've got to price in different ways, and we've got to think about that go-to-market in a very different way. So yeah, I truly believe that after product market fit, you've got to think about go-to-market fit and what is repeatable, scalable. And so for us, yes, it is that bifurcated approach, and it's about being efficient and effective down the bottom end. And bottom end, I mean, probably sub 500K MRR, and then we have a bit larger businesses that is a much more of an outbound target account model. But there's never two approaches. The big accounts, they often have engineering personas who come and try self-serve as part of their decision-making process. And so having that available is incredibly important. Well documented is very, very important. And also, we, all of us are in an environment which we have to be very careful over the risk we're bearing on behalf of ourselves and our customers and the partners we're working with. And so self-serve often can't be frictionless when it comes to payments. There's got to be friction. There's KYB, there's KYC, there's processes we've got to go through. And so balancing your risk posture as well as the ease of someone coming in and transacting is really important as part of that principle, which is different to other places. So yeah, I think it's really important that you think about that fit for yourself, but that you don't kind of bench yourself into one model or another, because often these things just all combine. None of the businesses we serve have scaled to beyond 20 million of revenue without a sales team, even if they were completely product-led to start with. In fact, some of the research says, Adam Schonfeld published a bunch of findings over this, that by the time you get to 100 staff, a product-led business is hiring salespeople faster than a sales-led business. Because now they've got that need to drive up ACV, and they need to get the enterprise deals. So it's complicated, you've got to find that fit. And for us, it very much is that bifurcated, two-stranded approach.
Very interesting. And Luca, for you, what are you experimenting in?
Well, I'm an engineer, not a sales guy. I'm not in marketing either. So my early days sales strategy has been to sort of build a product, talk to my customer as much as I could, and then iterate on the product until that customer is happy, and then try to find another customer who would be happy with it. Turns out it was naive, but it's also a good approach to start because you build something someone wants, and if that someone is not particular, it's like a common business and a common use case, then there is a very high chance that you're building something that other people will want. So I think we got a little bit lucky at the beginning. And then we sort of kept the same approach, which is still iterating extremely fast on the product and then shipping out stuff that's not finished. See if people get frustrated because they want to use it. And then if people get frustrated because they want to use it, then that's where we need to push our efforts. I've shipped something that no one is using like 6 months ago. No one's used it. No one's complained. It's bad. It's going to disappear. That's fine. And then now we've sort of moved more towards a sales-led motion where it's more about everything we discussed earlier, commitments, getting paid up front, because as Andrew mentioned, you can't scale that much without having salespeople, especially on complex implementations, payments. You need to reassure. I think GetPaid is probably the same. You need to reassure people because you're touching their invoices, you're talking to their customers, you're sending emails on their behalf. You need to make sure that they trust you. And so that's where the sales-led motion is inevitable because you have to create trust in the process. And even with the best onboarding either, except if you are Stripe and you have the brand, and even them, it's really hard to create the trust with just an onboarding flow, even if it's great.
Just on coming from a sales-led background, one of the things I found fantastic though about having a strong product-led channel is just the surprise and delight of looking at our pipeline and some random business has come in, never spoken to anyone, self-served, and then do 700 grand in revenue the next month. And it just appears in the dashboard, and you've got to then think about attribution and planning and how you replicate that. But it's a wonderful surprise when it happens.
It's actually one anecdote on that is like we started with because every person in business advised me at the time to say like, cut your onboarding flow, book a demo call, whatever, and then people will book their email. We had one demo a week. And we switched to self-serve where people could try the product. And we switched to 10 demos a week instantly. Like just by having sales first, because devs could try it, designers could try it, people could try it, talk to their CFO about it, and then so it was 2 years ago, it was a very small scale. It's still the same thing today, a different scale of course, but it's still the same thing. So I would advise to try it anyways. If you can and you have some kind of customers who will fit that description, I think try it anyways.
And Cyrosch, do you have any experience in the differences of larger enterprises and the complexity that comes with their scale versus some of the earlier enterprises? Not both on the selling to them, but also what they're requiring from a product perspective. What are some of the dynamics that you observe in these larger entities?
I mean, for large entities, you probably are more prone towards a more sales-led approach. Although you can have, and that's completely correct, kind of like a couple of self-serve or try it out yourself items. The difference is that, let's say, if you're just starting a business, and if you have a business of 300, 400, 500 million in revenue that grew for like 10, 20 years, is kind of like, I would say, almost the specificity of the business. You're relatively flexible when you're just starting your business. Say like, hey, why don't you do this type of invoicing versus that type of invoicing? Why don't you try to with your customer this kind of payment method, this kind of pay-in? Why don't you kind of like, you have no legacy, why don't you just directly use an end-to-end solution and a platform? These are kind of like more the discussions that you have, and you're thinking more about how do I actually get the process running of invoice to cash, and how do I can then scale, and what kind of like what decisions can I make that make them directly scalable? And the questions you are more like, if you have kind of like an established business, kind of like I have this huge business, and I was paid before. I was paid in the last 20 years. How can I just make this process of getting paid and this process of kind of like automating it more towards the need how I have developed now? Kind of like now I've just like, that's just how the way the business developed. Is like I just happen to have a lot of 1,000 euro invoices, which are, when you look at the total revenue, is just a massive amount. How can I kind of like make that more efficient? Now I just happen to have a large finance departments and finance ops that do reconciliation, and how can I kind of like make that more efficient? So it's kind of like more an optimization strategy, whereas when you look at very early, it's more a conceptual and strategic decision, I would say. That's kind of like the key difference, how you would approach it.
Super interesting. And just for the last few minutes, given that we've been speaking about automation, given it's 2024, curious about AI, obviously. So how are you using AI, both in how you're embedding it into your product for your customers, but also curious how you're using it internally. Are you developing any of your product internally with the help of AI? Are you coding? You know, I'm just interested in how you're building the product today with all the, you know, AI agents and the likes, or if you're just embedding it into your solution more for your customer side, or maybe a bit of both. Maybe Luca, you can start.
So there are two questions in one, actually. There is one which is, do you have AI into your own product, and then do you use it to build? As a guy who's still coding from time to time, it's my safe space. I'm still spending some time doing it. I think I have literally 3 or 4 times the productivity that I used to have because I don't type anymore. I just sort of ask. Even GPT-4 is fine. I don't
3
need
to 4 times?
Oh yeah, 3 to 4 times for sure.
Crazy.
In the last 2 weeks, I've been able to do Hyperline and then 2 small side projects, apps that I needed for myself for other things. One is for one of your customers, which is GeoGuessr, anyways. Just because once you've added the right memories, the right understanding into the bot, basically it can give you your files printed as you go. So before it would be like 30 minutes to type the file, make sure everything works. It writes the file, it writes the test, writes everything. So on that front, it has changed a lot of things for me in terms of productivity. Not the way I work, just productivity. In the product, it's very different. You don't want to run an invoice by talking to an AI. It's just the most awful process. You want to click on a button or you want the invoice to be generated automatically. The problem is, though, I have some customers, one especially, who has 15,149 euros invoices every month. That's a lot of invoices over a year. There is no way to detect any anomaly within that number of invoices. No way. Without AI, or at least without a smart system to do it. So you don't want to generate these invoices using AI, but what you want is some kind of AI to automate anomaly detection, discovery, basically make sure that you are sending the right email to the right person. This could have been achieved by software before, but now it's just way easier because you can customize the emails, you can customize the reporting strategy, you can customize how you want to flag that something is an anomaly versus not. And even current AIs, I think we are very far from it, but like even current AIs, they are still very good at detecting anomaly in patterns, right? If you send them the right data. And I think with the evolution of models, actionable models, I know some people have raised like H in Paris or some others doing that. I think you can automate a lot of the manual work from the implementation, from the run of the billing process, which takes a lot of time to businesses. Usually you have someone full-time when you reach like 15 million of revenue. I think you can automate most of that, actually, the daily chores of billing. So that's how we plan to edit, yeah.
Super. Andrew, at Paddle?
Yes, to all of those.
Yeah.
And specifically, if we think about, so absolutely in terms of productivity, absolutely there's a whole bunch of use cases, particularly around our tax computation. But then outside of that, we do billing support, buyer support, so millions of tickets. And our deflection rate there to AI is extremely high now, and CSAT has gone up.
Are you developing those products in-house, or are you using AI agents for your own?
Commercial ops team, there's a couple of things we've licensed in, but it's mostly built in-house. And we're continually innovating on that because it was really important for us that cost did not scale linearly with our revenue. And then, yes, we use it in marketing. All my teams, there's a whole bunch of things we're doing. But most pertinently, it's about giving non-technical marketers the ability to query, script, build, which is really cool.
Awesome. Cyrosch, anything to add?
I would say more the application, I would say it's a bunch of areas, but like 3 key areas. And one is obviously manual, everything around reconciliation, understanding that. You can do rules-based and you would still do it, but like AI and the usage just makes it more, I would say, dynamic and kind of like faster to iterate on improving the reconciliation. Second one is kind of like understanding structured and unstructured communication and data, so understanding and passing emails that are just like very common when they say like, hey, I want an extension of an invoice, or I deducted that invoice by X, so you can kind of like do a corrective invoice to that, or you can kind of like reflect that in your kind of like receivables. And the third one is more like now we've done the hard part, getting all of that data, and that's payment data, invoice data, it's performance data about customers in there, and kind of like using that for predictions, liquidity predictions, using that for kind of like predictions of, hey, give me the 4 or 5 customers with the highest risk of default, or that they're not going to default, to kind of like then actually use that to potentially kick off a dunning process a bit earlier, so you actually get paid 3-4 more days earlier, or use it kind of like to know, okay, maybe I use different payment terms, maybe there's something structurally wrong, to kind of like detect these insights, and that's kind of like the third field where you would use AI.
Super. Well, as an investor, I'm excited to see all the margin improvements in all of these companies with its productivity gains.
The margin improvements or the marginal improvements? Because they are definitely not margin improvements.
Not yet, not yet. I think we're at time now, so thank you so much to all 3 of you. Very exciting companies, actually, that we're following closely at Dawn, but other investors as well. So yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.